Is it bad if your aquarium gets hit by a bunch of sunlight? Well, I hope not, because we're going to try and have a tank that only runs on sunlight with no normal aquarium lighting whatsoever. And I think it's going to do really good. This whole thing got prompted because I had to do some rearranging of my spaces. I'm getting ready to do the new fish room out in the old Legit Fish Food headquarters. We had to move that operation inside. And that just got me thinking like, hey, I really could use a refresh on the space. So we started moving a bunch of tanks. We had to move some of the bookshelves down. I moved the scientific fish tank that has our betta fish in it into the corner that the pond hybrid aquarium was in, and I needed a new spot to put that thing. Hence why it got moved to here, which is right by the back door. Obviously, it gets a ton of sunlight. I thought this would be a really great idea, mostly for the peace lily, because we used to have just a normal potted peace lily here that ended up doing really well. So this one, before we moved it, was kind of not doing too hot. It would send out maybe a new leaf every once in a while. That leaf wouldn't really grow. There would be a little flower that would shoot out that would then pretty quickly turn brown and just die off. And our pieces of creeping Jenny were kind of getting a little dried out because of whatever reason. I'm not completely sure, but they definitely weren't getting a lot of light in that old corner. It got me thinking like the whole, you've heard it a million times, don't put your aquarium by a window where it's going to get sunlight, or else you're going to have infinitely more problems with algae and stuff like that. I've heard that like a million times, but I've also never experienced anything bad from having sunlight hit my aquarium. But I've also never had a tank that got like a ton of sunlight. Like a spot right here in my living room that obviously has a window right next to it. If we were to put a tank right here, would that be not good? It's hard to say like what kind of influence the sun is going to have on your aquarium because there's so many factors, right? Like how many hours is the sun hitting the tank? What time of year is it? Is it summertime? Obviously the sun is a lot more powerful that time of year. How established is your tank, and has it been in front of a window for a super long time already, and has it sort of acclimated to having that sun exposure? Did you just move the tank? Not to mention like the bio load of your tank, the normal aquarium lights that you're running, how strong are those? Like it's just impossible to know if the sun is really going to mess things up or not. So it's impossible to say, is the sun going to do a bad thing or is it going to do a good thing for your tank? In this case, we're hoping that it does a good thing. Due to the nature of this tank being kind of like a pond, but also kind of like an aquarium, it has the two sides here. And the positioning of kind of where we had to put it, I was like, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to see if we can get the sun to fully power this aquarium. Pond, hybrid thing, whatever this is. The tank has been here for a couple of weeks, and I can already tell right off the bat that the peace lily is definitely doing like a million times better. In the old corner where it wasn't really getting hardly any direct sunlight. Like all of it was just passive and kind of at an angle from the window that it was next to. And the light that I ended up putting on this thing was that little gooseneck thing. It was hard to get it up high enough to where it would do anything for the peace lily, but then also illuminate the tank. I ended up putting that light really close to the water just to illuminate the tank. And that left the peace lily and the creeping Jenny with pretty much only the light coming from, what was above in the room. So not an ideal situation for those plants, and I think those hold the key to this whole ecosystem. So if they're being healthy plants and they're growing, then I think no matter what kind of influence we get from the sun, I think that nothing bad is going to happen. This tank isn't going to break out with a bunch of algae. So that's the experiment that I'm kind of running here. And so far, so good. We obviously need like an infinite amount of more time to go by. It is winter, so the sun isn't super crazy strong on this thing. It is a super cloudy day too. I kept the light on here just to be able to show you what the tank looks like in the evening and then also with it on. But I promise I'm not cheating. I haven't turned this thing on at all. If you see it on eventually at some point in this video, that's the only time it's ever going to be on. The tank is pretty well illuminated. Like right now I think it's about 2:30 and it is a cloudy day, and from this side you can see it looks pretty good. This side, as you get later in the day, you just get all the reflections, so we can't really see on this side, which kind of sucks, at least from a camera perspective. But the light is definitely mostly in this kind of triangle here in the front. Hence why I planted a little bit of dwarf hairgrass when we moved the tank, because I wanted to just see how that would do. Something you might notice is all of these little bubbles that are up here. Future Mike, it is 4 p.m. We also filled the tank up since you saw that last clip. But see, bubbles still only in this first little like corner of the tank. There's much less bubbles in the corner where there's not as much light, and you can see just how much darker it is on a day that is way cloudier. You can still see in here. Anyway, back to the bubbles. I just thought this was really cool. Like the light hits this corner, there's bubbles. My kind of almost educated guess is that that's just oxygen from probably the brown algae that's in here, and or maybe it's just a sign that the plants that have access to the most amount of sun are actually photosynthesizing, and because the surface isn't really moving, those oxygen bubbles are staying there. Just thought that was pretty cool. Either way, it's something that we didn't have happening before, and so I take that as a sign that things are doing probably better in here. Definitely a symptom of not having really any water flow at all, just, relying on Brownian motion or whatever's going on in physics land here in the aquarium water. Just nature being kind of cool, doing some fun stuff that we get to observe. And something else that's kind of cool about what has happened since we moved the tank is that we haven't had as bad of a bacterial biofilm on this thing. So when it was over in the old corner, we had some pretty thick film that no matter what I did, we couldn't get rid of. And that's just a symptom of not having any water flow, relying only on Brownian motion in a tank, and having things like decaying plant material, a source of food for a particular type of bacteria that likes to live up at the surface. It's not really that big of a deal. It's obviously an unsightly thing, but beyond that, I'm not super worried about it. But it does seem like that film hasn't really come back as hard. It's still there a little bit, but I think that is just because the plants have been happier. The peace lily has been growing a little bit better, and there's probably been less decaying plant root material as well. Or maybe the UV light hitting this portion of the tank has been enough to kill that film. Not 100% sure. Hard to say 100%, but overall, tank's doing pretty good. The brown algae that you see on some of the sword leaves and on some of the dwarf sage was already present in the aquarium before we moved it, so that wasn't something that came about because of the sun or because we moved it. Everything else looks pretty much the same, if not better, since we moved it to this spot and since we've only been relying on the sun. I'm not sure why this thing isn't completely full. I think I just got lazy, so let's fill it up. I mean, this is just like a super cheapo light, put it on, I think there's full power. So when it was experiencing this in the other corner of the room, the plants weren't really growing. I mean, that was enough to sort of bring on a little bit of that algae. It doesn't take a ton of light, but it might take a little bit more light if you want to make your plants happy, depending on the plants, of course. So we know that this light isn't really cutting it. There's other things we could do, we could run, for example, a Kessel up above it. But you're still going to run into the issue of this peace lily is big, it's blocking a lot of the top of the water, so even with that sort of a situation, how much light is actually going to get into a tank like this? Hence why I thought, hey, this in person still looks pretty dang good, and at least we know, it's getting light from the sun. It can't be that bad. It has to be better than what we were doing before. At least I think it will be. And the evidence that I've seen so far in this little experiment is that it has been a beneficial thing. So I think the sword plant in the middle is starting to behave a little bit more like a sword plant should. The hairgrass, is a little bit of a pickier plant. It hasn't died off or anything. It also hasn't really grown that much. So again, only been 2 weeks. We need to let more time go by. And it is the middle of winter in the Pacific Northwest. So we're not getting a ton of sunlight. It's a totally super cloudy day. The tank does look a little bit better when the skies are clear, obviously. Hopefully I'll have some footage that I took from a day or two ago when it was a clear day, and you can see just how much more bright the tank is. It's not gonna look anywhere close to if you had artificial lighting, or even with that little spotlight on, it's not gonna look as good as that. But I think overall, it's just gonna be better for the tank. Natural aquarium is sort of a buzzword these days. I mean, I think it always has been, but certainly as of late, it's a very popular thing. People want to have natural aquariums. I get it. I do too. But I think at the end of the day, none of the things that we do with aquariums are natural, even though everything is still governed by the same laws of chemistry and physics. That's sort of an existential question for another day. But the point I'm getting at is that if I were to classify a supernatural aquarium, this would probably be the most natural of them all. Just because we're using that sun for light. I mean, LED lights are good at mimicking the sun, but they aren't the sun. So as long as the fish are happy, I'm happy, and I think the fish are happy. I haven't surveyed them or anything recently. We'll see how the plants do over the next few months before we get into summer. I think the plan for this, I was thinking about dirting this thing before I moved it, and then I was like, nah, we'll just park it here. And I think when we move it outside eventually, which is, has been the plan ever since we set this thing up at the end of the summer, I think then we'll dirt it and we'll go with a dirted outside pond hybrid thing. But we're not just using the sun to our advantage for this tank. we actually need to use it outside. So let's go do that. I promise this isn't going to be a rice fish video, but I got to show you guys the ponds that we have out here and give you a little bit of an update. We have 2 Medaka ponds out here. This is one of them. I'm going to be really gentle and slow here, try not to spook them. We don't want them to move around too much, but I can see 2 of them. Maybe you can too. 1, 2. There's a few more in here. I only think we lost 1 fish. I mean, we could have lost a couple more, but that was just due to the fact that it wasn't a fish that was meant to make it through the winter. Like, it's just as simple as that. I think I see a 3rd one. Yeah, so we have confirmed at least 3. There's probably a few more. The high for today is 44. Let's see what the surface temp is. Looking like a little cooler, 39, 40-ish. That's just what these fish are meant to do, so they can certainly tolerate that temperature. They've been out here for several months now, swinging around, you know, the upper 30s, the low 40s, but we are about to get some colder weather here in the next few days. So we're going to be touching down into the mid 20s. Maybe I think there's a day where it's going to be 20 degrees, and that's a little rare for, you know, out here in the Pacific Northwest. Like, it might only get a couple days like that a year, but because it is going to be a couple, maybe 2-3 days of that, I want to just make sure that everything's going to be good. So we're going to do a little bit of prep to our 2 ponds that we have over here to just make sure everything is going to be okay. The top of the water can freeze over for a few days. Like, it can be that cold, and these fish will probably most likely survive. But I don't know how crazy it's going to get. You know how the forecast is. We don't know for sure. So we're going to do something that I think is going to help pretty much guarantee everybody's survival. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of the pond plants that we have in these 2 bowls. We need the top to be completely flat because we're basically just going to make some lids for these things. I went to Lowe's and I got a big expensive sheet of polycarbonate. This is basically just greenhouse panel type material, and we're going to cut these to fit the top of our 2 ponds. So I'm going to try my best to cut like the best circle I can. I know it's going to be a little wonky probably, but these lids are going to help to create kind of like a greenhouse effect in each pond. So it's going to help to trap any heat that comes from the sun shining down on them. It's obviously going to help prevent heat from escaping these ponds too. Remember, the substrates in these things do produce a little bit of heat. We'll check back in tomorrow and see what the water temperature is at the surface after having these lids on for about 24 hours. All right, it is the next day. You can tell because it's raining. We've got our temperature gun, we've got our pond. I just want to check it's the same time as it was yesterday, and it's roughly the same temperature. So I think the high today is 45, so maybe a degree warmer. I just want to lift this lid and see if the sun's ability to create a little greenhouse in here has helped at all. So let's just move this over slightly. We got fish up at the top. Should probably look down here. It's looking like maybe it's a little bit warmer. Not the dramatic increase at the surface that I was hoping for. So maybe, again, I don't know if I put it on screen, but when we cut this polycarbonate, you know, we created channels of air that were not blocked off as it kind of was before. So maybe that sort of defeats the purpose. Like, obviously it's going to take the sun, it's going to trap a little bit of something, but I don't know if maybe we do need to caulk around this or do something to create more of a barrier so that it holds more air, so that it's more thermodynamically, like, you know, air physics. But maybe not. I am a little discouraged to see that the temperature was pretty much exactly the same, but air is the best insulator. That is something that is burned into my brain, and I will never forget it. So maybe we could fix something here to try and trap more air better. But then I also forgot that we have holes in here that lead into the pond for the cords for the LED lights. So that's something that I probably should put some silicone on. Should have done that a long time ago. So we'll probably mess around with that today before the cold snap, which is going to happen tomorrow. Fast forward, we got these holes plugged up on both of the ponds, and we got both of our lids completely siliconed all the way around. It's still curing, but I'm running out of time here, so it's gonna have to work. Hopefully that creates basically like a sealed chamber of air that will insulate a little bit better. But we will see, so say a prayer for my rice fish. I think they're gonna be okay. Like I said, not a rice fish video, but I feel like rice fish are still relevant to this video because they love the sun and they need the sun to display their best behaviors and to look their best, so it kind of works. We had to come in here and show you this really quick. So I had to pull the Yokozuna female, the one female I have, out of the tank because she just refused to put her eggs on this mop. Like, I don't blame her. There's a ton of crap in this aquarium. So she gets pulled out every morning and put into this tub where she then puts her eggs on the mops that she's supposed to. And then I take those mops and I'm having to put them down in a little methylene blue water because for whatever reason, these eggs just like to get fungusy. Something that I haven't really had to deal with, but we just come up with almost creative solutions and things are working so far. So the Yokihi over here have been doing a little bit of breeding. They're a little bit better at putting their eggs where I want them to, but I'm sure a lot are getting lost to the environment here. All of these things can be solved with having more space and not having your space look like this. I need to get this fish room project done ASAP, but it's a long process. It's just a lot right now. I hope you can understand, but this tank is still looking really, really good. Super clear water, no issues since we pulled out all of that Sylvinia in the last video. My sneaky little cyanobacteria is still just on like that one plant. Maybe a little guy over here has a little bit, but hasn't taken over, haven't gravel vacked, haven't done anything. Just sat back, relaxed, and enjoyed this tank since that video. Fish are all looking really healthy. I'm happy. This is the one thing in my life that is the constant, and I'm super thankful for that. The real test is going to be, does the sun actually do a better job than the lighting that may look like it's illuminated more? So when we turn that little crappy light on, the tank obviously looks like there's more light in it compared to right now, but is the sun just that much more potent to get the job done, to get what we want done in the aquarium? Can it grow the plants? Can it do what we want it to do? That's the experiment, and that's what we'll see over the next couple of months. If you're worried about sunlight and you don't know if you should put your tank in a certain spot because of it being right next to a window, if it's going to keep you up at night, then don't put it there. I think that's probably the best answer. I want you to be able to sleep at night, and so if it's going to stress you out because you're going to be thinking about it too much, then don't do it. Put it in a different spot. But I think at the end of the day, as long as it's not getting pounded by the sun, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I don't think it's going to make or break your entire setup. But certainly, I mean, don't take my word for it. I haven't done a ton of aquariums that had exposure to direct sunlight. The ones that I do, you know, it's just like a corner of a tank. It hasn't ever been an issue for me. So that's just my 2 cents. I've seen plenty of people that have tanks that get hit with direct sunlight for, you know, short amounts of time, maybe like even an hour, and that's not enough to really cause too many problems. I think that's most people's situations. I don't think anybody has a tank that gets sunlight like all the time, right? Depending on the position of the house and the sun and the time of year, like there's so many factors, like I've mentioned before. I just don't think it's something that should really prevent you from putting a tank in a certain spot. You know, obviously you might have to change something with the curtains. Like, I just wouldn't lose a ton of sleep over it. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got for the sunlight tank. I just wanted to show this monstrosity of an aquarium off. If you step back, it doesn't look that bad. But if you zoom in, I mean, I don't even want to do it. Oh my gosh. This is going to be the subject of not probably next week's video. It's going to take me a little bit longer, but I think it's going to be a really good example of how you can go through, troubleshoot, and either fix a tank or not fix a tank from an algae perspective, of course. I think it's going to be a good case study, but also got the new potato rolling. This one took a little bit longer than I thought, but it's starting to do its thing. It's making me happy. But yeah, I think that's going to be the grand total of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't be afraid of the sun.